Welcome to Photoshop. So today we're going to be just looking at the power of RAW. So a lot of times when you're taking photographs, something happens, you get the wrong exposure, or in this case it looks like it was getting dark and the person just didn't have enough to take this exposure. Maybe they were doing this handheld, didn't have anything to set the camera on or a tripod, so they kind of had to get the image. But then we're going to use the power of RAW. So RAW just takes a basic image, but no settings are processed or applied to it. This also gives us the latitude to shift exposure and color balance when we go into Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to hit the Command E, which will throw this over into Photoshop, but first we're going to make that stop into my favorite Adobe Camera Raw. Now we're going to switch this back up because I was playing with it, and this is what our original image looks like. So the first thing I would do is, this is a landscape. Now look what happens when we do landscape. It's actually going to make this a little bit more contrasty, and I don't want that. So I'm not a huge fan. It does saturate the color, but I'm actually going to keep this on Adobe Color. The next thing we're going to do is change the white balance to auto and see how well Photoshop can figure this out. And that looks like a pretty neutral color balance, so I think we'll keep that there. And so the next thing that we go into is exposure. Now I never use auto, so we're just going to go ahead and start to open this image up. Now here's something that's really going to help us. One of the problems with brightening or lightening this up is we're going to start to lose these clouds. So you have two options. You can do these adjustments now, which are global, meaning everything that we do here affects the whole image, or we can use the adjustment brush. So we're going to be doing some of both. The first thing that we need to do is, we're just looking at this area and we're going to do our best to get more out of this situation. So I'm going to come in here and just bump up my shadows as much as I can, that I think looks good. And you can see, wow, just getting that much detail out of this image and how dark it was is just simply amazing. So if you grew up in the time like me of shooting film, this image was, useless at that point. So that looks pretty good. It is a little bit blue, so I'm going to come in here to the color balance and I'm going to warm this up. So we're just going to simply warm that up. And then we're going to come into the highlights. But I'm going to wait to use the highlights because I don't want to start to lose these highlights. So we're going to click on that adjustment brush, and I will delete this one since I've already done something to it. And we're just going to come over here and hit plus. That's going to set everything as the default. It's going to let us increase the highlights in this image. I'm going to make my brush bigger, and if you do too much or it doesn't look good, don't worry, because you can always go back in and fix it. So we're just kind of brightening this area up. Now I don't want to brighten this area up as much. I want to do it at about 50%. So what I'm going to do here is change my flow rate to 50. And then I'm just going to come in here and hold the minus key. This is going to make this so it erases 50%, and then I'm just going to go over that once. And now we've darkened that one little area back down. I think I'm going to do that right there as well on those rocks. So we've got this here, and then our sky. So what we're going to do is hit new. So we have a new adjustment. I'm going to take my exposure and knock that down, and then we're going to come up here, darken this sky back down so we don't lose that there. Now, does this look good? No, it's not perfect, but this is a nice even point where we want. If you watched any of my other videos, you've heard me talk about toning flat. I don't want to get too contrasty in the beginning. I want kind of that extended tonal range. I can pull those black and white points back towards the end to do kind of if I want something hotter or darker or more contrasty, but I want to work with my image a little bit flat. So we're going to go ahead and hit open image. So we've got this image here, and what I'm going to do is bring up this info palette. Now info palette's like one of my favorite things in the world. So we can see the K value, or the whites in this, are pretty dark. We're about 20 to 30%. I don't want that dark. So what we're going to do is go down to the adjustments, bring up a curves level. And yes, I only work in curves. I rarely use levels. And notice, I would normally, to make this look good, I could bring in my shadow points, but remember, I want to keep everything flat in the beginning. So one of the cool things about the info palette is when you make an adjustment, you'll see down here, it has one number here and then one number here. It's meaning it was this and now it's this after your adjustment. So I can say, I'm only at 26%. So that means I can go much, much brighter, get a whole lot more out of this image. So I'm just constantly looking in here, and we're going to come and we're going to brighten this up. And I think that's starting to look pretty good. It's brightening this area up. You can see when I did that sky, my brush was way too big and I missed this area. So bad on me, but that's okay. Just a tutorial. Normally I would just go back and fix that up. Alright, so this looks pretty good. Now, this is affecting the whole image. Right, so we have this adjustment layer and it's affecting everything in the image. So if there's something that I don't want this to affect, I can come in here, grab my black color, size this down, and paint it out. So I'm just going to say, hey, I don't want to brighten those areas. I'm happy with where they are, and I'm going to come up here to the sky. I want a stronger feather, and we'll paint this back in, and you can see that stupid halo from where I didn't do a good job before, but kind of fixed that pretty good, and that looks good to go. So this is starting to look better. Is it perfect? No. So now we're going to start to isolate some of these areas as far as when or how I want to adjust them or what I want them to look like. Just because I want it to look a certain way might not mean that you want it to look a certain way. And that's okay. So I'm going to come in and actually make an adjustment layer. Now I'm going to be adjusting it, but I'm just looking at the waterfall. All I care about at this point is the waterfall. So I am going to bring this up. I'm going to bring a little bit down. But the main thing I wanted to do here was adjust the color. So I'm actually in curves and I've gone to the blue channel because I actually want to add yellow. Alright, so if I go up, I'm adding blue, and if I go down, I'm adding yellow. So I'm just turning that cyan kind of blue a little bit yellow, and then I'm going to go up here to red, and I'm going to add some red to that. Not too much. You have to be careful when you use the curves adjustment, especially for color. It is very sensitive, so a little adjustment will do a whole lot. So we'll go back up here and turn this on and off so you can see it really did make a huge difference. I like the color better here, here, and everywhere. So I'm just going to keep that and leave it and let it affect everything in my whole image. It really kind of made this from that cyan ugly color, kind of warm that up as well, and it's warmed this up, so I'm happy with how that's gone. The next thing I'm going to do is go into my hue saturation, and I'm going to drop down into cyan. I'm going to go all the way in the saturation to the right. Now this is just showing me sometimes when you're looking at blue and cyan, you can't tell if it's cyan or blue. So if you want to know if the color is blue or cyan, you just saturate it all the way. If it turns neon like this, you know there's a ton of cyan in it. So what I want to do is I'm just going to suck a little cyan out. We're going to go into blue. Now this image happens to have both cyan and blue. So you'll see when I go over here, it's just getting super saturated. So we know we have a little. So what I'm doing here is telling Photoshop, I like this cyan. I don't want to totally get rid of it and make it gray, but I also want to desaturate a little bit of it in those areas to get rid of it. Now I don't want to get rid of it up here. So we're going to come up, we're going to grab the black, and then we will just simply paint it out. So black in this layer right here is saying to hide. I don't want to see the desaturation of the cyans in those two areas. So we're just going to leave that like that, and we're good to go. I'm going to come back down here to my info palette. Just going to grab my lasso because it's a little bit more accurate. And you can see I'm at about 10% there on that white. That's right where I want to get it. Right where I want to get it. The next thing we're going to do is saturation. So we're going to come in here and we are going to add a little bit more saturation to these colors. So we will make an adjustment layer, hue saturation, and I can saturate everything, which I don't want to do. So I'm just going to hit Command Z, go out. So the two colors that I really want to saturate are yellow. We'll just add 10, and green, and we'll add a little bit of that. So what that's doing is just kind of super saturating the yellow and the green. We're not making it super vibrant. I don't want it to look totally fake. Now, if I wanted it to look fake, I could obviously come in here, go to master, and really start to boost things up and put them wherever I wanted. But we're just going to leave it there for now. We're going to get a little bit more out of these colors down here. So let me set this back to 0. So I'm going to come in, make another curves adjustment, and now I'm just looking at this. Even though it's adjusting everything, I don't really care. I'm only looking at this area. So I've brought out the highlights a little bit there. I'm going to hit Command I to hide that. So what we're going to do, you can see right now that adjustment is being hid because everything is black because I've inverted it. So we're going to make this white, and I'm going to paint it in. So what we're saying is we want to apply or show that adjustment in these specific areas. So any area that I paint over, it's going to apply that. So now when I turn it on and off, it's doing it here but not here, which is exactly what I want. So the last thing that I can do is I can say right here it's a little bit too bright for me still. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to lower highlights. And if I do it too much, that's okay, because we can go in here and adjust that. So I'm just going to paint that in to apply it. If you want to take some of that out, you can just adjust your opacity, and that looks pretty good. So the last thing that I'm going to do here is kind of add that contrast back into the image that we did not have. So I'm going to do a stamped visible layer, which is Command Option Shift E. And there's the stamped visible. This layer is a combination of everything that I've done. What we're going to do here is we're going to go up to Filter, Other, High Pass. I want this to be 2 because that's normally what I do it at. And we are going to change this to Linear Light. This is what's called dynamic contrast, and we're just kind of giving it some of that pop. It's also sort of a sharpening issue. Sharpening actually doesn't sharpen anything. It just kind of makes like a highlight on one side and a shadow on the other. And so it's sort of doing the same thing. Then I can kind of dial some of this out if I want. But you can see it really is making that image pop. So if you remembered in the beginning, I said I'm not going to add the contrast till the end. I'm doing some of that contrast in that high pass layer. Now I can come in here and give that a little bit more pop. But usually when I slide this over to add contrast in something, I do bring my shadows back up to where they were, because I don't really want to change the tonal values. I just want to give it a little bit more contrast in my image. So I'll come up here to layers and I'll turn this off, and then on, off, then on. And that's really kind of giving it that final pop of the image. Now I could come in here and obviously do more stuff to this image, but as you can see, using RAW could really help you get a lot out of an image, and there's some basic adjustments in Photoshop can help. When you're toning an image, you want to look at it and decide where you want your global adjustments, meaning everything to be applied, and where you want your isolated. And the reason you usually do an isolated adjustment is because if you did it globally, where it would fix one issue, it would mess up another issue. So hopefully that's been helpful. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below, and don't forget to subscribe.